I grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina. I always say I led a pleated khaki life in Raleigh, North Carolina, where there was a relatively high probability I was going to end up being a real estate developer or a lawyer selling real estate investment trusts. And I realized that I didn't want to do that. I'd always wanted to be a warrior. I didn't even know if that was a thing. People really only talked about that in the context of like mascots at basketball games. And then 9/11 happened. And there was this kind of realization, and my community was like very sheltered from any type of like physical violence. Of like actually like there's physical violence in the world, it happens in the United States, and there's a need for people to go and continue to serve in this capacity. And I felt like this realization that I could do this as a career. It was what I wanted to do, and luckily I had the opportunity to do it professionally. And then like I got out in 2017, and to be honest, was just lost for a long time, trying to figure out what do I do now that this mission that I've spent my whole life preparing and executing is gone. And I remember getting out thinking, being frustrated in the military, just being like, there's so many things about the way that we make decisions, the way that we account for equipment that are just so dumb, and you can't fix it inside the military. Like you would have to get out, build technology, and then make it just like criminally stupid to continue doing them the way that we're doing them. And I remember thinking, I was like, I'm gonna get out, I'm gonna do technology. I didn't even know what that meant. Luckily, I had some friends at Palantir. They're like, come here, little guy, like we'll give you a job. And they always say that they taught me that tables were not things that you throw when you're angry, but they were repositories for data that you could store data inside. And like I learned all that at Palantir, but I still felt lost for several years. And one of the pieces about military decision making that drove me crazy that I learned in 2016 when I was a special operations officer in Mosul was just, we have this planning process. We plan on whiteboards, we plan on acetate maps, we plan on every application inside the Microsoft 365 suite. And it takes us weeks to do something that with the technology available today should take seconds, but that technology hasn't been put together and doesn't exist. And my co-founder, Clint Alanis, we served together in MARSOC back in 2014 through 2016. He got out, stayed in, got out, and we were talking summer 2023 of, he's like, hey, you remember that planning process that used to drive you crazy? We're still doing it and nothing's changed. Like we should work on this together. And so he and I got to talking in the fall, started the company up in January 2024 to solve this problem of how do we achieve decision dominance? How do we make decisions? How do we fuse all of this data, multimodal data, and fuse it in seconds to make the right decisions across the full range of military operations? And how do we do that faster than a peer level adversary? And that was really, I think, a problem that he and I and the team that we've put together is just like uniquely positioned to solve. So our core values are, we're here to serve, we're here to win, and we're a culture of and. I think at the end of the day, especially my co-founder Clint and I, service has been an integral part of our entire professional lives. And I think there's really no greater way to live your life than to be able to serve others in a way that you're uniquely capable, that aligns with your values. And I think there are a variety of different ways you can serve. I mean, we were focused on serving national security. And I think that's, Clint and I have dedicated most of our professional lives to that. We're looking for people that, want to be part of that mission, at least for a time in their life. And, if maybe they didn't get a chance to serve in the military, but what we want to create here at SMAC is a place where you can feel like you had a chance to serve. At the end of the day, we're here to serve our country, but we're also here to serve each other. And I think that's, another key piece that, Clint and I experienced in the Marine Corps as a whole, but especially in MARSOC, because like we're a team and you wake up every day and you're like, you look at yourself and it's like, I'm not going to let my team down today. And like, how can I be here for my team? That's the type of environment that we want to have here at SMAC, is that people, they're here to serve their country, but like they stay because they, love being on the team. Our second value, we're here to win. I mean, at the end of the day, like everyone doesn't get a trophy. I mean, this mission matters. Like you have to be good at it. Like our nation depends on it. And I think in many ways, winning is downstream of culture. And I think like, being here to serve, being here for each other, like helps create a team that's gonna win, but we have to, and we have to do whatever it takes. And it kind of gets into our third value, which is we're a culture of and. I feel like what was weird for me when I got out of the Marine Corps was going into the corporate space and hearing this whole concept of, the iron triangle of like, you can have speed and you could have cost and you could have quality, but you can't have all three, you can only have two. And it's like my whole career is like the Marine Corps is like, no, like I want it cheaper, faster, and like, I want it yesterday and it has to be good. And there was just no concept of this trade-off. And everyone, was like, oh, you have to make a trade-off, you can only have two. And I think I just fundamentally reject that. I mean, and obviously I get that like at some point, like there's not an infinite amount of money or an infinite amount of time. But I think everyone uses it to just be lazy and make that trade-off earlier before they really try to do everything they can possibly do. As I always tell, people on our team, like everything that you can possibly do to get it done at the right price, faster, and at the right level of quality. And as my drill instructors used to say, even the laws of physics can be overcome with a little extra motivation, and we're a company that finds the extra motivation. I always say this about both the team and the type of technologies we use. It's going to take a village. Like, we need people that understand the problem. We need people that understand how to sell to, the parts of the government that can actually buy technology. We need people that understand the users who have no money but know what they actually need. We need people that know how to build AI models. We need people that know how to make deterministic solutions that can be leveraged by the models. There's just like all these different skill sets we need. And what I think one of the problems I see in a lot of tech companies is people that are good at a particular skill tend to have similar kind of values, and they tend to form kind of like cliques and circles because they're the same type of people. They see things the same way. They like the same things. And so you see companies that are like really, really good at one kind of like area of technology, but they can't put all the pieces together. And I think most hard problems fundamentally are integration problems. Like, there's nothing worth solving that you can solve with a single discipline. And I'd say like today, like there's almost nothing worth solving that you don't need 10 completely different disciplines. And all those different disciplines have like different tribes and different cultures, but you have to find a way to create a culture that bridges those different value systems and capabilities and can bridge those, what would generally be siloed groups into a place where we can all succeed together. At the end of the day, being able to trust your teammates has to be rooted in a belief that your teammates are competent and that they're going to be there for you. And I think your team isn't going to trust you if you haven't been through the same training that they've been through, if they don't think that you're competent. And so I think really it's important first to be a competent human and member of the team so that you're an asset to the team, because then you can be trusted by them to do the right thing, to be there. And you want to know that you can depend on them in the same way. And so in many ways, like individual capability, I think is one of the like core components you need first in order to have the team to have trust. And I think we hire and screen for people that we believe have the capabilities they need, but also the slope or the ability to learn new things, so that the things that they aren't good at, we trust that they'll actually get there, and we screen for that. The military is known for being direct. I would say I've been the recipient of very direct and unfiltered feedback during my time in the Marine Corps. And I don't think that was necessarily always right, in that if you think from an outcome perspective, I'm giving feedback because I want to see a change in behavior. I don't want to waste time beating around like what the issue is. It's important that it's clear that there's a problem, but you need the person to receive that information and like actually and hear it and actually internalize it. And we're all different. We all have different personalities. We receive and process information in a different way. And I think that it's actually really important, especially like if you're a leader and you're delivering feedback, that you understand how the people that you're working with need to hear information so you can deliver it to the best of your ability in the way that they need to hear it, because that's going to increase the probability that they actually receive it, internalize it, and change behavior. So I think if you think about it from an outcome focus, this idea of like, I'm just going to say whatever I want with like no emotional intelligence behind it because I shouldn't have to do that, is actually wrong. You're just being lazy. And like the right answer is figure out how they need to hear it. Be direct, but deliver it in the way that they can actually receive it and internalize it. You have to be competent as an individual first. I hear all the time in like the tech space, oh, we're a company with like no egos and there should be no ego here. I mean, it's just like ludicrous. Like anyone that's good at anything has an ego. I've never met an egoless person that was good at anything. Growing as a person is managing that ego into the service of other people. And you don't have to have been born to serve national security to work at SMAC. I think you need to be competent, and you need to want to serve a purpose greater than yourself. And it's fine if that purpose is other people. But I think like you can tie in and you can be very successful here, taking your discipline that like you're great at and being a really strong team member and being there for the team I think that that's totally fine as long as you're aligned with, we do work on national security here. We certainly don't, talk around like what we're actually here to do, which is, to deter conflict if required, win it. But as long, that doesn't have to be your life calling, but you've got to be able to take your ego and meld it to the team's requirements and be a good team member. I think one of the most important attributes is developing what I call range. I mean, there's a book that David Epstein wrote called Range, but I think it's this idea of like being able to be enough of a generalist that you can understand the perspectives of people outside your discipline. And at the end of the day, I'm not saying that like we don't need people that are really, really good at one thing. Like we absolutely do. But so much of solving the hard problem is figuring out the kind of integration points between the different disciplines. And the only way to do that is to learn enough about the other disciplines that you can help find, hey, I think this could integrate here, this is the right tool here. And if I'm the only person looking at that, I'm going to drop the ball. It's like the whole team needs to be able to find those integration points. I think learning what other people do, and not just at like a paper thin level, like, go a little bit deeper, learn what other people do, understand how it all needs to come together, because it'll make you better at integrating the discipline that you're really good at in the right way for the team's mission if you understand the whole piece. And I think the other piece is, we call it slope, but it's, the ability to learn. We all have a lot to learn. There's a lot of skills that everyone's gonna have to develop, that I have to develop, that like we don't necessarily come in having. And I think that that's fine as long as you're able to kind of learn, make new mistakes, and continue to grow. Slope and range are the two most important values beyond just, the capability that you're bringing to the team in your particular discipline. After COVID, there was a lot of conversation of like, with Zoom, like you don't necessarily need teams to be in person anymore. And I think like philosophically that's true. And I think frankly, if you're working on a problem that isn't as hard as what we're working on, that's even more true. But what I've just found over time, and like we'd see this in the Marine Corps, I saw this at a couple of companies, tech companies I worked at after getting out of the Marine Corps, is that there's just something about human nature where we assume the worst about each other when we're not in person. And I've just seen people like in a silo of Zoom in their house, assuming that like everyone's out to get them. You don't have the kind of interpersonal connections that you have when you can like hang out with people that you're working with on a daily basis. And it just has created like levels of dysfunction in teams that I've never seen in person teams. And so I was trying to think about like, why does this not happen in the Marine Corps? We did a 18-month workup together as a team in person every day, developing this shared understanding and values. And like we spent the time together to be able to function cohesively as a team when we were apart. And I don't think that there's a way around that without spending a lot of time in person. So will we have people together all the time? No, but that time in person and like it, being frequent is really important in developing a cohesive team that can win and perform well. I think with the amount of stress that we all deal with on a day building the technology, it's like useful to have time to like work out, take care of yourself so that you can be healthy and like have the clarity of thought to deal with the amount of ambiguity and stress that we have to deal with building the product. And I think that when I look for myself, it's easy to always justify, like I could spend 2 hours going out and like wrestling and getting punched in the face, or I could like keep working, or I could keep pitching, or I could keep jamming on a roadmap. It always feels easier to say, well, I should spend the time working. But like I just find that I have diminishing returns over time if I don't take a couple hours and go do something physical to like clear my mind and de-stress. And I think building that into our daily routine is important, both for like the mental health of the team, but frankly even just the productivity of the team. Like you'll end up with a better output if you're taking care of yourself. And like I said, we were terrible at taking care of ourselves in the military. We of course like trained physically all the time, but no one took care of their mental health. No one took care of their body. You just break down, and then you just over time like you can't perform at the same level. And I think what we want to offer is an opportunity to be mentally healthy, physically healthy, provide those opportunities to people on the team. And I also just think there's a lot more to life than just sitting inside and like sitting in front of a computer screen and building. Like at the end of the day, we're humans. We used to wander around in the dirt, in the sun, doing hard physical things. I think that's like an important and interesting part of life that has been meaningful for me over my life, whether I was like working as a climbing guide, doing mixed martial arts, doing the fun and exciting parts that I got to do in the Marine Corps. And like, I want to make sure that people who work here have the opportunity to participate in that. I think, what ultimately, like what we want to create here for the team is an opportunity to serve, specifically to serve national security, and for it to feel like the kind of tight-knit, like special operations community that like Clint and I came from, that, honestly was one of the most meaningful experiences like in my life. And I think a lot of veterans struggle with when they get out. It's like you never find that again, you miss it, and you think about like, what is it about it I miss? And it's the feeling of like, there's a really hard mission that we need to work on. It matters. And there's a time pressure and hard things to achieve, and that you get the opportunity to achieve that with a group of people that you're really close to, that have a shared difficult experience together, trying to work against a really hard problem. And I think that is the most meaningful part of my life, was doing that at MARSOC. And I think what Clint and I have created is the ability to do that again. And what we want is to kind of find the people that want to go on that journey with us. And granted, it's same problem, different aspect of the same problem, but like that's really what we want to create here.